The Greeks are known for lots of great things that we've inherited, like democracy and the arts and the sciences, and what we're doing right now, this trialogos, through these mikrophonos. These are all Greek things and Greek technology that we've accepted as part and parcel of Western civilization. But there was another part to them. And it's a part, again, that is not taught in high school mythology or Western Civ. And there's this deeply mystical aspect in the mysteries, for example, which the Greeks really looked to as something that wasn't just like a special part of civilization, but the central part of it. This 4th century historian Zosimus, he records the testimony of a Roman guy named Praetextatus, who was initiated at Eleusis. And this guy, Praetextatus, is recorded as saying, Valentinian, please don't shut this down. I'm an initiate. I've been to Eleusis. I've drunk the potion. I've seen the goddess. Please do not eliminate this. Eleusis is the one thing that holds the entire human race together, he said. He said, if you get rid of Eleusis, life for us will become abiotos, which in Greek means unlivable.
So, as some of you may know, the Joe Rogan Experience, hosted by Joe Rogan, recently aired an episode with Graham Hancock and Brian Muraresku. So these two guys are historians and scholars. Of course, some of you may know about Graham Hancock. If you check his Wikipedia page, you'll see that he's known for his pseudoscientific theories, but as some of you may know, Joe Rogan is quite into sort of conspiracy theories and things of that nature. Hancock has come up and supports certain ideas regarding super ancient civilizations like Atlantis that predate the early civilizations that we know of. And Muraresku, who is actually a newcomer to this whole thing, he's actually a lawyer professionally, but he's trained in classics. He can read and speak Aramaic and Sanskrit and ancient Greek. So he teamed up with Graham Hancock to write this book, The Immortality Key, The Secret History of the Religion with No Name. And of course, Joe Rogan being a fan of both Graham Hancock and the main focus of this book, which is psychedelics, he had them on his podcast. So this book is largely about psychedelics. It looks at the possible role that psychedelics could have played in ancient religions and cultures, as well as its possible relationship to early Christianity and Judaism. They go over in the podcast, psychedelics, they claim, have had impacts on Hindu culture, Buddhist culture, I think Islamic, Jewish, Christian, Greek, Roman, all these various massive cultures that form the pillars of the modern world. In terms of what types of psychedelic substances were used, they talk about psilocybin mushrooms, ergot, and Amanita muscaria, which are all sort of the big candidates for some of the most popular psychedelics historically. And this book specifically actually looks at Muraresku's search for spiked drinks in the Greek and Roman world and their use in Christian ceremonies as well.
There are two finds that I really went out of my way to put into this book. One is trying to find hard evidence of this ergotized beer, and the other is trying to find actual hard evidence of wine that's been spiked. And ideally, that would be spiked wine in the context of some kind of Christian ceremony.
So the discussion itself, which I do recommend if you are into history at all, even though Graham Hancock is in there, and I'm not sure I buy most of what he says, Muraresku actually does almost all the talking, and what he says actually does make a lot of sense. He doesn't really make these leaps like Graham Hancock does. But anyway, the discussion really starts with Eleusis and the Eleusinian mysteries. For those who don't know, Eleusis is a little town area in Greece. It's on the Attica Peninsula, and it was the site of this religious cult dedicated to Demeter. The current ruins of this are actually available. You can go see those today in Eleusis, and pretty much it follows the story of Hades kidnapping Persephone, and then Demeter, I don't know how you say it, descends to the underworld to try to get her back. Eleusis is sort of the place, mythologically, where Demeter descends into the underworld, and she enlists the help of some of the local kings to try and help her out, and along the way, she gives them these divine gifts. And so the Eleusinian mysteries are essentially what people in this Demeter cult would go and do. This became sort of a festivity. Not a lot of people did it. It was pretty heavily gate-kept. When Eleusis came under the control of Athens, it sort of became a wider Athenian thing. You actually had a lot of famous people doing these things: Plato, Aristotle, and Marcus Aurelius. There's the lesser mysteries and the greater mysteries. The lesser mysteries being some things that happen regarding the ocean and the river and some rituals that happen there. And then there's the greater mysteries, which is where the people would go into the main building in Eleusis, the main temple, and some mystical experience would happen there. We don't know what, and the people that went through it have described going through a sort of trip similar to that of Demeter, where there's the descent into an underworld, it's a sort of discovery in the underworld, and then there's an ascent, and often these people are described to no longer fear death and to feel like they have achieved salvation or enlightenment. And Muraresku's idea as for what this possibly could have been is psychedelics. So throughout the podcast, Muraresku documents to some extent his search for evidence for this. There's a lot of circumstantial stuff which he does line out. A lot of these accounts do seem to line up with how psychedelics are described. If you've ever listened to Joe Rogan, you've probably heard about things like this. But he also looks for hard archaeological evidence as well. So a big part of the podcast, he's talking about his time in Spain. Of course, a lot of these psychedelic trip things weren't actually just reserved for Eleusis or Athens specifically. They spread throughout the entire Greek world, which actually expanded all the way into Spain, which is where you start to see a lot of these pieces of evidence for Muraresku's thesis.
So this thing was filled at some point with some kind of ritual beer that was used in some kind of ceremony dedicated to Demeter and Persephone. But that's not all they found. They also found the remains of ergot. And it is the first and most compelling data to support this scorned hypothesis from 1978 that's ever emerged.
One of the big points of the podcast centers around this guy, Triptolemus. Triptolemus was a supposed demigod sent by Demeter from Greece to then go across the Mediterranean and teach people how to farm. And it is shown that he was in Italy, or at least that's what the myth says. He's one of those people where no one really knows if he was a real person or if he was just mythical, although it is entirely likely that someone or some group of people fulfilling his role did exist to try and bring farming to the rest of the Mediterranean. However, as Muraresku points out, and I'll let him speak to this, there is a slight inconsistency.
What is Triptolemus doing there? Was he really sent as a missionary to teach people how to farm? However, across the Neolithic period, people know how to farm. People are already farming. Why would Triptolemus need to be sent on a mission to teach people to do something they already knew how to do, which is farm? He was teaching not about growing the grain, but about what grows on the grain, which is ergot.
That's an interesting insight by him. Of course, farming did exist. And as some of you may know, ergot does grow on wheat, on grain. There's speculation that in the Salem witch trials, that's actually what caused people to kind of go crazy. And ergot actually occurs naturally all the time, and it is a psychedelic. Of course, Joe Rogan comes in clutch with his incredible insight on Triptolemus's name.
The guy's name's so right on the nose, too. Triptolemus.
I never thought about that until
think
right
of
now,
that?
because I don't do DMT.
But I mean, people tripping.
Things get even more interesting when Muraresku talks about the implications this has with Christianity and early Christian rituals. He brings up this example. There is actually some evidence in a very old temple in Israel where weed and other types of cannabis were used in the place of incense to sort of hotbox the congregation. There's also an interesting part where Muraresku uses his knowledge of ancient languages to actually clarify a part of the Bible where it says that people are falling asleep as a result of using the Eucharist, which, by the way, in this interpretation, they are assuming the Eucharist is actually a form of psychedelic spiked wine. I'll let him explain that.
And Paul is addressing this early church in Greek, but he's essentially yelling at them for consuming the wrong kind of Eucharist. That's why so many of you are weak and sick, and a number of you have fallen asleep. And I highlighted the word koimontai there. So koimao in Greek, I can tell you for certain, does not mean to fall asleep. Koimao means to die, because it's the exact word that John's gospel uses about Lazarus. Remember the famous miracle where Lazarus dies and he's resurrected? That'd be a pretty shitty miracle if Lazarus was just taking a nap and Jesus went to wake him up from a nap. What Paul is saying here is that he's concerned that so many Corinthians are drinking a wine that is causing them to die. Why would wine cause you to die in a Greek world that had no distilled liquor? There was no hard alcohol in ancient Greece. Distilled liquor doesn't enter Europe until much, much later. At this point, wine is not known for its alcoholic content. Wine is a potion that is routinely mixed with all kinds of stuff. Toxins, spices, perfumes, and plants, herbs, and fungi. And here, we don't know what to make of it, but the Corinthians are drinking something that's causing them to die.
As for my impressions of this, I did find it pretty interesting. I think Muraresku's idea and the broader idea of psychedelics playing a role in early religion is very plausible. I want to see more evidence before I kind of commit to it, and I also am curious to hear counter evidence to this. I also think the presence of Graham Hancock is a little sketchy. He does write the foreword for the book. Overall, I'd say definitely check out the book, check out the podcast. So that's it for this video, guys. I was trying something new with this one, just figured I came across this podcast. It had to do with history. I figured I'd talk about it. Hope you guys enjoyed, and I'll see you in the next one.